Walter Reed was 46 years old, a structural engineer who had spent 20 years quietly building the kind of life most men would be proud of. A career his crew respected, a home he renovated with his own hands, and a 14-year marriage he had never once questioned. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He was the man who showed up, held things together, and never asked to be celebrated for it. His wife Angela saw that steadiness and called it smallness. So on an ordinary Tuesday evening, she sat him down in the living room of the house he built and told him she needed more than the life he was offering. She wanted him gone by the end of the month. What Angela didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she never thought to look, was that 3 days earlier, Walter had inherited $60 billion, and he hadn't told her a single word of it. She threw out the wrong man, and she had absolutely no idea. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee maker clicked on at 5:29 a.m. Same as always. Walter Reed was already at the kitchen island. He stood in the pale yellow light with a set of load calculations spread open in front of him, a pencil tucked behind his ear, reading numbers the way some men read scripture, slowly, carefully, looking for the thing that didn't add up. He wore his work pants and a gray undershirt. His boots were by the door, already laced. The house was quiet around him. It was a beautiful house. Not in the way of houses in magazines, not decorator beautiful, but in the way of a thing built right. Walter had gutted the kitchen himself in the summer of 2016, reran the plumbing, relaid the tile by hand over 3 long weekends. He'd rebuilt the back porch the following summer, sistered the floor joists, refinished the hardwood throughout the main level in the fall of the year after that. Every straight line in the place had his hands in it. He looked up from his papers. The garden outside the back window was a tangle of dead growth and last season's weeds. Angela had planted it in 2020 with real enthusiasm. Herbs, tomatoes, 2 rows of black-eyed Susans along the fence. She'd lost interest by June of that year. He'd kept it going quietly for a while after that, watering, pulling weeds. At some point, he'd stopped. He couldn't remember exactly when. On the mantel in the living room, the last wedding photo they'd taken together was dated 2019. After that, nothing. Not a deliberate removal. Just an absence that arrived so gradually that it looked, from inside it, like nothing at all. He poured his coffee and went back to the calculations. Angela came downstairs at 6:40, dressed for work, and moving with the purposeful distraction of someone already 3 steps into a different day. She was put together the way she always was, blazer pressed, hair done, heels she could walk fast in. She opened the refrigerator, looked inside for a moment, closed it. She glanced at Walter. "You're wearing that to the Meridian site?" Walter looked down at his canvas work pants, his firm shirt with the small logo on the chest. "It's a field day," he said. She made a small sound through her nose. Not quite a laugh. The kind of sound that means, "Of course it is." She picked up her bag from the counter, checked something on her phone, scrolled. "I'll be home late. There's a thing at the hospital." "What kind of thing?" "Administrative." She said it in a way that didn't invite the next question. Walter nodded. He capped his thermos. Angela was out the door by 6:52, an hour before she needed to be. She didn't kiss him. She'd stopped doing that somewhere in the past 2 years. Not in a dramatic way, not after a fight, just the way tide pulls back. Quiet, continuous. And one day you look up, and the beach is different, and you can't say when it changed. Walter rolled up his schematics, slid them into the tube, and reached for his boots. The Meridian site was a parking deck rehabilitation on the east side of Charlotte, and Walter's crew had been working it for 6 weeks. He arrived at 7:45 and walked the lower level with his site foreman, Darius, who had 9 years with Walter's firm and the particular calm of a man who never got rattled by things that couldn't be fixed. They talked rebar placement, expansion joint tolerances, a section of soffit that needed re-evaluation before the next pour. Two younger crew members nodded to Walter as he passed. One of them asked him to look at a drain detail that wasn't sitting right. He did. He knelt down and looked at it with the same attention he'd given the schematics at 5:30, pointed out two things to correct, and that was that. Nobody performed around Walter Reed. They just worked. He was eating a sandwich in his truck at lunch when the call came in. A 337 area code. Lafayette, Louisiana. The woman on the phone was a nurse named Denise. Her voice was careful and kind. Odessa Charles had suffered a stroke that morning. She was stable but not well. She was asking for her nephew, the nurse said. She had been asking since she was brought in. She was very specific about it. Walter put his sandwich down. "Just him," Denise said. "She keeps saying just him." He called Angela from I-85, heading south, the truck packed with nothing but his overnight bag and his phone charger. Her answer was pleasant, measured. "Oh, Walter, I'm so sorry. Is she okay?" "She's stable. I'm going down." A breath. Then, "How long do you think you'll be gone?" He held the phone against his ear and watched the highway unroll ahead of him. "I don't know yet," he said. "Okay. Well, keep me posted." A pause. "Drive safe." She hung up first. Walter set the phone on the seat beside him and drove. He reached Lafayette at 10:30 that night. Aunt Odessa was asleep when he got to her room, small in the hospital bed. One side of her face pulled slightly wrong, her breathing slow and even. He sat in the chair beside her and took her hand in both of his. Her skin was dry and thin, the way old people's skin gets, like paper that's been handled a long time. He didn't say anything. He just sat with her. The long miles were still in his legs, and something else was in his chest. Something that wasn't grief yet, wasn't quite worry, just unease, the kind that comes when you've driven a long distance to be somewhere real, and realize, somewhere on the road, how far you were from real before you left. He held her hand and waited for morning. The morning light came through the hospital blinds in thin, pale strips. Walter had slept in the chair with his head against the wall, and his hand still loosely wrapped around Odessa's. He woke with a stiff neck and a dry mouth, and the disoriented few seconds of not knowing exactly where he was. Then the smell of the room came back to him, antiseptic and old air and the faint sweetness of the flowers someone from Odessa's church had left on the windowsill. And he knew. He sat up straight. Odessa was awake, looking at him. Her eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been the night before. The stroke had pulled the left side of her face down slightly, softened her mouth at one corner, but her eyes were sharp and dark, and entirely her own. She watched him get his bearings with the patient, faintly amused expression of a woman who had watched him do things slowly and carefully his entire life, and was not bothered by it. "Morning," Walter said. She squeezed his hand. He leaned forward in the chair and got close enough that she wouldn't have to strain. The nurse had told him her speech was effortful. He didn't want to waste what she had. She found the words in pieces. Her voice was thicker than he remembered, slower, pushing through something, but she got there. "Everything," she said, "is with Rochelle." She stopped, breathed. "It's arranged." Walter nodded. Rochelle Price. He hadn't thought about Rochelle in months, but the name came back easily. She and Walter had been friends since freshman year at North Carolina A&T, and he knew Odessa had always liked her. It made sense she'd trusted Rochelle with the paperwork. "Don't be surprised," Odessa said. She pressed his hand harder than he expected, harder than a woman in a hospital bed should have been able to. "Just be still first." Walter looked at her. "Okay," he said quietly. "I will." She seemed satisfied with that. Her grip eased. She closed her eyes. He assumed she meant the burial arrangement, the house in New Iberia, whatever small savings she'd kept. He made a mental note to call Rochelle after he left the hospital, to make sure nothing needed his immediate attention. He never thought to assume anything larger than that. That was not a failure of imagination. It was just that he knew Odessa, or thought he did, and Odessa had never been a woman who trafficked in anything larger than what was necessary. She passed at 3:17 that afternoon. It was quiet. A machine changed its tone. A nurse came. Walter stood at the window for a while and looked at the parking lot below, at the ordinary movement of ordinary people going about an ordinary Tuesday, and let the fact of it settle through him at whatever speed it needed to. He cried once, briefly, in the car before he drove to the funeral home. Not in a way he would have described to anyone. He handled the arrangements himself. He called the church in New Iberia. He called Kenny, his brother in Raleigh, who went quiet on the phone for a long moment, and then said, "I'm sorry, Walt." "She was everything." "She was," Walter said. He drove back to Charlotte 2 days later with Odessa's framed photograph wrapped in a dish towel on the passenger seat, the one from his college graduation. The two of them standing in the sun, her hand on his arm, both of them squinting against the light and grinning. It was the only photograph of himself he had ever chosen to display. Angela met him at the door with a casserole dish covered in foil. "I got this from Louisa at work," she said, holding it out. "It's chicken and rice. She said it reheats well." She hugged him. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Her chin touched his shoulder, and then she stepped back. "How was the drive?" "Long. Come in. I'll put this in the fridge." She talked while she moved around the kitchen. Something about a staffing review at the hospital, a conflict with one of the floor directors, a parking policy that was causing problems. Walter sat on a stool at the island and listened and said the things you say when someone is talking and you are present, but not quite there. That sounds frustrating. Yeah. What did they say? She did not ask about Odessa beyond the basic surface of it. She did not ask what the last 2 days had been like, or whether he needed anything, or how he was actually doing. She was not a cruel woman. She was simply not thinking about him. There is a difference, though it doesn't feel like one from the inside. Rochelle called 3 days later. "Walter." Her voice had weight in it he couldn't immediately classify. Not grief, not emergency, something else. "I need you in my office. Today." He went. Rochelle Price's office was on the 14th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte, and she had clearly been preparing for this meeting for some time. The conference table was covered. Trust documents, corporate filing records, property deeds in stacks organized by state, maps with highlighted parcels across Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi. A separate folder sat alone at the near end of the table, closed. Rochelle herself was standing when he came in. She had the contained, deliberate energy of someone who has rehearsed a difficult conversation and is holding it carefully. She shook his hand. She told him she was sorry about Odessa. She meant it. Then she asked him to sit down. She talked for 20 minutes. Walter listened. He learned about Harold Charles, Odessa's husband who died in 1991, the railroad logistics man, the quiet and extraordinarily patient investor who spent 30 years buying mineral rights and land parcels and small-cap energy holdings while living simply and saying nothing about it to anyone except Odessa. He learned that Odessa had held everything exactly as Harold left it, and watched it grow through 4 decades of compound interest and 3 different fund managers and an energy sector that went through revolutions. Harold had the luck or the vision or simply the patience to be positioned for. Rochelle opened the folder at the end of the table and slid it across. "The estate," she said, "is currently valued at approximately $60 billion. Walter looked at the number on the summary page. He read it once. He read it again. The room was very quiet. He set the paper down flat on the table, carefully. The way you set down something you are not sure about the weight of. He looked out the window at the Charlotte skyline. At the buildings he knew, some of which he had in one way or another helped make safe. He sat with the number the way he sat with everything, without rushing toward it, without panic, without any of the performances that other men might have reached for. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked his only question. "Does Angela know?" Rochelle held his gaze. "No. The trust has been privately administered. There's been no public record." Walter nodded. Something behind his eyes went very still. "Keep it that way for now," he said. He sat in his car in Rochelle's parking garage for 45 minutes after that. He didn't call anyone. He didn't look at his phone. He sat in the driver's seat with his hands resting on his thighs and stared at his palms, the calluses from years of field work, the small scar on his left thumb from a tile saw in 2016, the dry knuckles of a man who worked with his hands in all weather. These were the same hands he'd held Odessa with 2 days ago, the same hands she'd pressed with more strength than she should have had. Don't be surprised. Just be still first. He had thought she was talking about a house and some savings. $60 billion pressed down on the inside of the car like a weather system, and underneath it, equal in weight, unnamed, not yet fully formed, something else pressed too. Something that had to do with Angela's 2-second hug and her casserole from Louisa, and the way she had talked about parking policy while he sat across from her, still carrying the long miles home from his aunt's deathbed. Walter sat in the concrete quiet of the parking garage and stared at his hands and did not move. Walter pulled into the driveway at 6:42 that evening. He sat in the truck for a moment before going in. Not because he needed to collect himself, because he had already decided what he was going to do, and he wanted the decision to be clean before he crossed the threshold. He got out. He went inside. Angela was at the kitchen counter with a glass of wine, scrolling her phone. She looked up when he came in. "Hey, how'd it go with the attorney?" "Fine," Walter said. He set his keys on the hook by the door. "Odessa left me her house in New Iberia. Little bit of savings." He said it easily, the way you'd mention a parking ticket. "Nothing complicated." Angela nodded. "That's good. At least there's something." She looked back at her phone. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge." "Thanks," Walter said. He heated the pasta. He ate it at the island. Angela moved to the couch and put on a show. They exchanged maybe 12 words over the next 2 hours. When she said she was going to bed, Walter said goodnight. She said goodnight without turning around. He sat in the quiet kitchen for a while after that, listening to the house settle. He woke at 2:04 a.m., for no reason he could name. He lay still for a moment in the dark, then got up slowly so the mattress wouldn't shift. Angela didn't stir. The kitchen light above the stove was the only thing on, throwing a low amber glow across the counters. He filled a glass from the tap and drank half of it standing at the sink. That was when he saw the phone. Angela's, face up on the counter near the coffee maker, screen still lit from a recent notification. He was 3 feet away. He wasn't trying to read it, but the preview was right there. "Miss you already? Thursday, still?" Walter read it. He set his glass down. He picked up the phone, gently, carefully, turned it face down, and placed it back in the exact position he'd found it. Same angle, same distance from the edge. Then he went back to bed. Angela was breathing steadily beside him. He did not wake her. He did not say a word. He lay on his back in the dark with his eyes open and stared at the ceiling and felt something move through him like a current. Not rage, exactly, but something underneath rage, something older and quieter than that. He let himself feel it for exactly as long as it needed to move through him. Then he put it somewhere below the thought line and started to build. That was how his mind worked, when it worked at its best. Not in emotions, but in structures, load paths and stress points, and the sequence in which things failed. He'd spent 20 years learning how buildings came apart, which meant he'd spent 20 years learning the order of things. He thought about what he knew. He thought about what he didn't know yet. He thought about what mattered and what didn't. He thought about Rochelle. About $60 billion sitting in trust documents on a conference table 14 floors above uptown Charlotte. About Angela's phone going face down in the dark. By 4 a.m., he had a shape. Not a plan yet. Plans needed more information, but a shape. Silence first. Patience second. Documentation third. Don't move until you can see the whole structure. At 5:30, his alarm went off. He got up. He made coffee. When Angela came down 40 minutes later, he asked how she slept. He refilled her mug without being asked. He was warm and unhurried and gave her absolutely nothing to read on his face. She didn't seem to notice either way. He went to work. 4 days later, she asked him to sit down. It was a Sunday, late afternoon. Angela was standing in the living room when he came in from the backyard, and she had the careful, collected stillness of someone who had rehearsed this moment more than once. Her hands were folded. Her chin was level. "I need to talk to you," she said. Walter sat on the couch. He rested his elbows on his knees and gave her his full attention. She talked for about 6 minutes. She said she was unhappy, that she loved him, but wasn't in love with him anymore. She used those exact words, the ones people use when they've read the script somewhere before. She said they'd grown into different people, and she needed to pursue her own life. She said she'd already spoken to an attorney. She would like him out by the end of the month. Walter listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for exactly 1 breath. Then he asked his question, calmly, without heat. "Is there someone else, Angela?" She paused. 2 seconds, maybe a little more. "No," she said. "This is about me, about what I need." Walter looked at her steadily. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. "I appreciate you being direct with me. I'll be out within the week." He was gone in 5 days. He took his tools from the garage. He took the photograph of him and Odessa from the mantel, the one he'd brought back from Lafayette, the one no one else in the house had ever asked about. He wrapped it carefully in a flannel shirt and put it on the passenger seat of his truck. He left everything else. He did not look back at the house as he drove away. The corporate apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in South End. Furnished, clean, anonymous. A gray couch. A glass coffee table. Blinds that let in the city light in thin strips. Rochelle's firm kept it for clients in transition, which was the professional way of saying clients whose lives had just broken open. Walter set his tools by the door. He put Odessa's photograph on the kitchen counter, still wrapped in the flannel shirt. He sat on the gray couch and looked at the room for a moment. Then he called Kenny. He didn't plan what he was going to say. He just dialed. Kenny picked up on the second ring. "Walt, what's going on?" Walter told him. All of it. The inheritance first. The mineral rights, the land trusts, Harold's patient 4 decades of accumulation, the number that didn't feel real even when Rochelle's documents made it real. Then Angela's speech, her folded hands, her rehearsed words. Then the text message on the counter at 2 in the morning. "Miss you already. Thursday, still?" "B." He said it plainly, the way he said most things. Kenny was quiet for a moment. "I'm already in my truck," he said. He arrived at 8:47 that evening. He knocked twice, came in when Walter opened the door, and set a 6-pack on the counter without ceremony. He looked around the apartment once. He didn't say anything about it. He sat across from Walter at the kitchen table and listened to the whole story again. Slower this time, with more detail. He asked a few questions. Not emotional questions, practical ones. When exactly did she move her stuff to the guest bathroom? How long has Thursday been a pattern? What's the guy's last name? Walter didn't know the last name yet. Kenny opened a beer. He held it without drinking it. "She looked you in the face and lied," he said. "She did. And you just—" Kenny stopped himself. He set the beer down. He looked at his brother steadily. "Okay, tell me what you need." "Documentation," Walter said. "Before any legal proceedings start. I need the shape of this thing on paper. How long? Who he is? What they did? And you don't want a PI. I want someone I trust." Kenny nodded slowly. He picked up his beer again and drank. 2 weeks, he said. "Give me 2 weeks." Kenny was not subtle by nature, but he was smart, and he was patient when the work required it. And he knew how to ask questions sideways, how to let information come to him instead of reaching for it, which was usually how the useful kind arrived. It took him 11 days. The first piece came from Darius Webb, a guy Kenny had done electrical work for twice, who had also known Walter and Angela socially for years. Kenny mentioned, in the middle of a conversation about nothing in particular, that Walter and Angela were separating. Darius looked genuinely surprised. Then something crossed his face. "I always thought it was a little weird," Darius said, "at Marcus and Tina's New Year's thing, 2 years back. Angela came with that Brett Calloway guy. I figured Walter just couldn't make it." He paused. They weren't acting like they came separately. Brett Calloway. That was the name. Kenny thanked Darius and moved on. He didn't write anything down until he was back in his car. The second piece took 3 days and a contact Kenny had from a commercial contractor in Ballantyne, a guy who maintained systems at a hotel in South Charlotte. Not anything dramatic, just a pattern. Brett Calloway's rewards account showed a specific and consistent habit of midweek check-ins, Wednesday nights mostly, occasional Thursdays. Thursday. The third piece was almost absurd in how easy it was. Kenny found it on his phone, at a gas station, with a cup of coffee getting cold in his other hand. A Spotify playlist, still public, created 3 years and 2 months ago. Titled with 2 initials, A and B, and updated as recently as 6 weeks prior, 3.5 years. Kenny stared at it for a moment. He thought about his brother building that bridge, the Brookshire project, the one Walter gave up weekends and evenings and an anniversary dinner to finish on time. He thought about what was happening on Wednesday nights while Walter was running load calculations by flashlight on a job site at 10 o'clock at night. He didn't call Walter. He just drove to the old neighborhood. He parked a block away from Walter's house, the house Walter had renovated room by room with his own hands, and he waited. It didn't take long. The Porsche was already in the driveway. He took a photo. He sent it to Walter without any words attached. Walter's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He picked it up and looked at the photo for a long moment. His face didn't change. He set the phone down. He opened his laptop. He found Rochelle's email address and typed 4 words into the subject line. "We're ready to begin." He sent it. He closed the laptop. He poured a glass of water from the tap and carried it to the window. 14 floors below, Charlotte moved through its evening. Headlights and streetlights and the lit-up shapes of buildings he knew by their bones. He had worked on some of them, had stood in their frames before the walls went up, when they were still just structure and intention. He stood at the window and looked at the city for a long time. Kenny knocked at 7:15 in the morning. Walter was already up. Coffee made, shirt on, yesterday's calculations still spread across the glass coffee table. He opened the door, and Kenny walked in carrying a manila folder and nothing else. No coffee of his own. No greeting. He set the folder on the kitchen table. He sat down. He looked at Walter and said, "Read it all the way through before you say anything." Walter sat across from him and opened the folder. It was organized the way Kenny organized everything he took seriously. Chronological, clean, each page with a handwritten date at the top corner. There was a printed list of dates and locations, a hotel receipt log that Kenny's contact had compiled, names redacted except for the rewards account number Kenny had cross-referenced, a screenshot of the Spotify playlist, the creation date circled in blue pen, 2 pages of notes in Kenny's blocky handwriting, times, places, names of mutual acquaintances who had seen them together and assumed Walter knew, and at the back, a credit card statement, 1 page, highlighted in yellow, charges at the same South Charlotte hotel, at restaurants Walter had never been taken to, at a jewelry store in Ballantyne on a date Walter recognized without wanting to. February 14th, 3 years ago. He had worked that night. He remembered because the Brookshire project was in its worst stretch. The load redistribution on the eastern span had come back wrong from the lab, and he had stayed on site until almost midnight, rechecking calculations by hand. He had texted Angela from the parking lot. "Sorry. Long night. Love you." She had responded with a heart emoji. He read the folder all the way through. He turned back to the first page and checked the earliest date Kenny had been able to document, 3 years and 7 months ago. He did the math, without meaning to. The Brookshire Bridge rehabilitation had started 4 years ago. The 70-hour weeks, the ones Angela later described as the beginning of their distance, the period when she said he had become emotionally unavailable, had started 3 years and 8 months ago. 1 month. She had been with Brett Calloway for 1 month before she started describing Walter's work schedule as the reason they were falling apart. Walter closed the folder. He placed his hand flat on top of it. He held it there for a moment, the way you hold a wound when you don't want to look at it directly. Not pressing, just covering. Kenny watched him and said nothing. Walter opened his laptop. He scanned the folder's contents into a single PDF, using the scanning app on his phone, page by page, without rushing. He attached it to an email. He typed Rochelle's name into the address field and wrote 3 words in the body of the message, "For the file." He sent it. He closed the laptop. "Thank you," he said to Kenny. Kenny nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else. He chose not to. Rochelle came to the apartment at 2 that afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table with her briefcase and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she walked Walter through the legal structure with the steady precision of someone who had been preparing for this conversation since the moment Walter sat across from her in her conference room. The inheritance was untouchable. The estate transfer had completed before Angela filed, and even if the timing had been reversed, it would still be protected as inherited property under North Carolina law. It was Walter's, entirely and legally his. Angela's attorneys could challenge it, Rochelle said, but they would not succeed, and the attempt itself would cost them time and money they would not recover. "So she gets nothing from Odessa's estate," Walter said. "Not $1, Rochelle said. She had already filed the formal response to Angela's petition. Walter listened while Rochelle described Angela's position. Equal division of the house equity, the house Walter had purchased, renovated, and maintained. The vehicles, both retirement accounts and the full balance of their shared savings. Her attorney had filed quickly. The posture, Rochelle said, was confident, almost casual. "She thinks she knows exactly what she's walking away with," Rochelle said. "She doesn't," Walter said. "No," Rochelle said. "She does not." She gathered her papers and closed her briefcase, and looked at Walter with the direct, even expression she had worn since they were 19 years old studying for finals in the A&T library. "Are you all right?" "I'm working this afternoon," Walter said. She accepted that answer because she knew him well enough to know it was a complete one. The retaining wall was in Rock Hill, South Carolina, a residential slope that a contractor had poured wrong and a homeowner had been watching crack for 2 years. Walter arrived at 3, walked the grade, crouched at the base of the wall, and ran his hand along the fracture line. He took measurements. He made notes. He gave his assessment to the contractor standing behind him. Clear, specific, correct. The contractor wrote it down. Walter drove home. He made rice and chicken on the stove, ate at the kitchen table, washed his dish and the pan, and dried both by hand. He put them away. He went to bed at 8:50. The city hummed 14 floors below. He closed his eyes. He slept. Rochelle called at 7:45. Walter was already dressed. Dark charcoal suit, white shirt, no tie. He had pressed the suit himself the night before. "You ready?" Rochelle said. "Yes." "Dress well this morning." "I did." A brief pause. "Good." Not to impress her. To remind her. Walter looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for exactly 1 second. Then he picked up his jacket and his keys and walked out. Rochelle's firm occupied the 14th floor of a building on South Tryon Street. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows and a long glass table and chairs that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Walter had been here twice before. He knew where the coffee was. He poured a cup, sat down on his side of the table, and placed his legal pad in front of him. Rochelle sat to his left. Her associate, a quiet young woman named Priya, sat beside her with 2 accordion folders and a laptop. Angela arrived 8 minutes late with her attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, who wore a blue pin-striped suit and had the practiced ease of someone who believed the outcome of this meeting was already determined. Angela walked in behind him. She was dressed well. Burgundy blazer, hair pinned back, the polished administrator's look she wore like armor. Her eyes moved to Walter and then away. Quickly. The way you look at something bright. She sat. Fitch set his legal pad on the table. He nodded at Rochelle with the collegial confidence of a man who thought he was here to accept a check. Rochelle let him settle. Then she opened the first folder. "Mr. Reed maintains a private investment account," Rochelle said. She slid a single document across the table. A certified account statement, clean and unambiguous. Funded entirely from independent consulting income earned outside the marital household. Opened 9 years ago. Consistently documented as a separate asset. She tapped the bottom line. $1,611,240. Fitch picked up the statement. He read it. He set it down and picked it up again. Angela looked at the number. Something moved across her face. A flicker of recalculation, quick and involuntary, like a person adjusting their footing on ground they thought was level. "This was never disclosed in preliminary," Fitch began. "It was never part of the marital estate," Rochelle said. "It doesn't require preliminary disclosure. But we're disclosing it now, clearly and completely, so there's no confusion going forward about the scope of what is and is not in play." Fitch looked at Angela. Angela looked at Walter. Walter looked back. His expression did not change. He gave her nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not apology, just presence, the full, even, unhurried presence of a man who had been in this room the entire marriage and simply hadn't been looked at. Fitch requested a recess. They were gone for 19 minutes. Walter drank his coffee. Rochelle made a note. Priya organized the second folder and said nothing. When the door opened again, something had shifted in Angela's posture. Not broken. Angela was not a woman who broke visibly. But the casual certainty was gone. Fitch sat down with the careful composure of an attorney recalibrating, which meant the recess had not gone the way he hoped. Rochelle gave them a moment to settle. Then she opened the second folder. "In the course of preparing the full marital asset review," she said, "our forensic accounting team conducted a standard audit of the joint savings account. What they found was not standard." She slid a summary sheet across the table. Clean columns. Dates on the left. Amounts on the right. 34 rows. 34 transfers over 26 months, totaling $51,000. Rochelle's voice was even, uninflected, precise as a scalpel. The receiving account traces to a holding entity registered to Brett Calloway's brokerage firm. The room held a particular silence. Not the silence of surprise, exactly. The silence of a thing finally being said out loud that has been true for a long time. Fitch looked at the sheet. He did not look at Angela. Angela did not look at the sheet. She looked at the table. Her hands were in her lap. Walter uncapped his pen. He wrote the figure on his legal pad, $51,000, and drew a single clean line under it. He looked at Rochelle. "Amend the claim," he said. "Already drafted," Rochelle said. Walter capped his pen and set it down. He looked across the table. Angela was looking at him. Directly. Fully. The kind of attention she had stopped paying him so gradually that he hadn't noticed the moment it disappeared. He saw it now. The full weight of it. She was seeing him the way people see something only after they've lost the ability to look away. He didn't look away either. He let her look. He just didn't give her anything back. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Walter buttoned his jacket in the elevator, rode down alone, and walked out into the pale morning light of South Tryon Street. Kenny was parked at the curb in his truck, engine running. Walter got in the passenger seat. Kenny pulled out without asking questions, merged into traffic, and drove. 3 blocks passed. Then 4. "You good?" Kenny said. Walter looked out the window at the city moving by. Buildings going up. A crane turning slow against the sky. "Getting there," he said. Kenny nodded. He kept driving. Kenny was eating cereal at Walter's kitchen table when Walter came out of the bedroom the next morning. It was 6:15. Kenny had slept on the pull-out couch and hadn't complained about it. He looked up from his bowl. "Tell me what you need," Kenny said. Walter poured his coffee. He stood at the counter for a moment, the same way he stood at every counter, every morning. Still, thinking, letting the day organize itself in front of him. "Brett Calloway's business," Walter said. "I want to know what it actually looks like, not what he presents. What's underneath?" Kenny set his spoon down. He had been waiting for this. Not impatiently, exactly, but the way a man waits when he already knows the answer and just needs permission to go find it. "Give me 2 days," Kenny said. He was done in a day and a half. Kenny spread everything across Walter's kitchen table the following evening. Not a thick folder this time, a thin one. That was the thing about a man built on nothing. There wasn't much to document. Walter sat down and read it carefully. Brett Calloway's commercial real estate brokerage was not a firm so much as it was a performance of a firm. The revenue didn't come from sustained deal performance. It came from investor capital. Money churned in at the beginning of each project, partially consumed by fees and operating costs, and then replaced by fresh capital from the next pitch before anyone looked too closely at the last one. 3 outstanding contractor disputes. A civil judgment filed in Mecklenburg County 2 years ago, settled quietly for an undisclosed amount. And the Noda Project, a mixed-use development in Charlotte's Noda neighborhood. Arts district, rising rents, the kind of area that attracted money looking for a story to tell about itself. Brett had been pitching investors for 8 months. In at least 2 documented meetings, he had referenced incoming residential assets as part of his capital position. He hadn't named Angela directly. He hadn't needed to. He implied the number the way men like Brett always implied things, with the confident vagueness of someone who knew the suggestion would land harder than the specifics. He had been using the expectation of Angela's divorce settlement to make himself look solvent to men who were deciding whether to give him real money. Walter read that section twice, not because he was surprised, because he wanted to be precise about what it meant. He set the folder down. "You know Aldous Webb?" Walter asked. Kenny thought for a second. "Big guy. Commercial developer. Does the mixed-use stuff. I've worked with him for 8 years, Walter said. He's in the Noda project." Kenny looked at him. "You going to call him?" "Yes." "What are you going to say?" Walter stood up and carried his coffee to the window. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, moving, building, indifferent. He watched it for a moment. "The truth," he said. He called Aldous Webb the next morning from his apartment, standing at the window with his second cup of coffee. Aldous picked up on the second ring. They exchanged the brief, genuine pleasantries of 2 men who had stood on enough job sites together to have earned them. Then Walter said it plainly. I've heard Brett Calloway is using anticipated residential equity as part of his capital position on the No Day project. I have some familiarity with that situation, Aldous. The equity he's referencing is contested. Actively contested. It is unlikely to materialize in the form he may have represented to you. A silence on the other end. Not shocked. Aldous Webb was not a man who shocked easily. Calculating. I appreciate you telling me, Aldous said. I just wanted you to have accurate information, Walter said. You can do what you want with it. I will, Aldous said. Walter thanked him and ended the call. Aldous called Brett within 90 minutes. Walter didn't know exactly what was said. He didn't need to. He knew structures. He knew what happened when you pulled the right support. 2 other investors in the NODA project contacted Brett's firm that same afternoon requesting updated financial documentation. The real kind. The kind that showed actual capitalization and not projected intake. Brett could not produce it. Not in the form that matched what he had implied. The first investor withdrew by end of business. The second began the formal process of withdrawal the following morning. Walter made one more call, to Rochelle. The $51,000 documentation, he said. I want it in the public divorce record, filed clearly, accessible. Rochelle was quiet for exactly 1 second, the silence of a woman confirming she already had this ready. Brett's contractors, she said. The ones in active dispute. Yes. Already drafted, Rochelle said. I'll file it tomorrow morning. Thank you, Walter said. She called that evening to confirm it was done. Walter thanked her, set his phone on the counter, and walked back to the kitchen table. His structural drawings were spread across it. Load calculations for the retaining wall consultation in Rock Hill, pencil marks and annotations in his precise, unhurried hand. He sat down, uncapped his pen, and found his place on the page. The apartment was quiet. The work was in front of him. He got back to it. Walter arrived at Rochelle's office 40 minutes early. The receptionist led him to the conference room without needing to ask which one. He set his folder on the table, slim, organized, everything in order, and then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out the framed photograph. Odessa and him at his college graduation, her hand on his arm, her face full of something that looked like quiet triumph. He set it face down beside the folder. Rochelle came in 5 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of Walter and took her seat to his left without ceremony. Kenny came in behind her, still pulling his jacket straight, and dropped into the chair beside her. Nobody said much. There wasn't much to say. They had already said it. They waited. Angela and Brett arrived together at 9 on the dot. Walter heard them in the hallway before he saw them. The particular rhythm of 2 people who had rehearsed this entrance without admitting they were rehearsing it. When the door opened, Brett came in first by a half step, and his hand moved to the small of Angela's back as they crossed the threshold. Not affection, something closer to a flag being planted. Angela looked composed. Her blazer was pressed. Her expression was the one she wore in professional settings, measured, unreadable, faintly elevated. She glanced at Kenny, then at Rochelle, and then her eyes settled on Walter. Walter looked back at her. His face gave her nothing. Brett took the chair beside Angela with the ease of a man who believed he belonged in every room he walked into. He leaned back slightly. He folded his hands on the table. His eyes moved across the space the way a man's eyes move when he is counting exits and calling it confidence. Walter let them get fully settled. He let the room find its weight. Then he spoke to Angela. I want to ask you one question before anything else, he said. His voice was even. Not warm, not cold. The voice of a man with all the time in the world. And I'd like you to answer honestly, even though I already know what you're going to say. Angela held his gaze. Okay. What did you think Aunt Odessa left me? Something moved across Angela's face. Not guilt, more like recalibration. The small adjustment of a woman who had expected a different first move. "Her house," she said. "Some savings. That's what you told me." "I know what I told you," Walter said. He opened the folder. He turned it slowly, so it faced her, and slid it across the table. Not pushing it, just moving it, the way you'd move something you wanted someone to take their time with. He let her read. The room went quiet, in the specific way rooms go quiet when the air changes. Angela read the number. Her eyes stopped. She went back and read it again. Walter watched her face move through the arithmetic, watched the moment the number became real, watched what it cost her to understand it. The composed expression didn't break. It just became something different underneath. A mask still on, but with nothing behind it holding it up. Brett leaned over. He read it. His posture, the territorial ease, the borrowed confidence, every piece of the performance he had walked in with, drained out of him so completely and so quickly that it was almost clinical to watch, like a load-bearing wall failing. Slow, then all at once. Walter didn't watch them the way a man who needed the satisfaction would watch. He watched them the way he watched structural failures, carefully, informationally, confirming what the math had already told him. When Angela looked up, Walter spoke. "You left before you knew. I want to be clear about that." He kept his voice clean. "No edge on it. No performance. Not to hurt you. I'm telling you because I want you to understand exactly what the sequence was. You made your choice when you thought I was one thing. This doesn't change what you chose. It just shows you what you chose it against." He gave her a moment to sit with that. Then he turned to Brett. Just once. He had not looked at him directly since they walked in. "You've represented Angela's projected settlement as part of your capital position to investors in the No-Da project," Walter said. "That conversation has already happened with Aldous Webb. The $51,000 transferred from our marital account to your firm's holding account over 26 months is now part of the public divorce record. Your contractors in active dispute with your firm will have full access to those filings." Brett opened his mouth. Walter raised one hand. "Not angry. Just final." "I didn't invite you," Walter said. "You came on your own." Brett closed his mouth. Walter reached across the table and picked up Odessa's photograph. He held it for a moment, her face, his younger face, that day, that woman, everything she had quietly known and quietly built and quietly left behind for him to find. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Angela one last time. Her eyes were on him, both of them, fully, the way they hadn't been in years. "I hope the life you were building," he said, "was worth the one you took apart." He walked out. The afternoon light outside Rochelle's building was bright and flat and indifferent. Walter pushed through the glass door and stepped into it. Kenny fell into step beside him without a word. They crossed the sidewalk and moved through the parking lot together. Not fast, not slow. The way men walk when the thing they came to do is finished. Walter unlocked his truck. They both got in. Kenny let the quiet sit for a moment. "That's it then," he said. Walter looked out through the windshield at the parking lot, the street beyond it, the ordinary afternoon going on without any knowledge of what had just happened inside that building. "That's it," he said. He started the engine. Walter was on site in East Charlotte by 7 the next morning. The drainage project was a straightforward redesign. A residential neighborhood where the existing culvert system had been undersized from the original build and had been flooding 3 blocks of homes every time it rained hard. The kind of problem that looked complicated until you understood the actual load. Then it was just math and pipe diameter and making sure the water had somewhere honest to go. His crew was already there when he pulled up. Marcus had the survey stakes out. Jerome was walking the low point of the grade with a measuring wheel. Everything exactly where it should be. Walter put on his boots, grabbed his clipboard, and went to work. He didn't mention the previous day. Not a word of it. Marcus asked how he was doing, and Walter said fine and meant it in the specific way he always meant it, not performing fine, not suppressing something, but genuinely, functionally present in the work in front of him. They walked the site. He reviewed the elevation data. He made 2 adjustments to the proposed outlet location based on what he saw on the ground, explained his reasoning to the crew in plain language, and spent the rest of the morning doing what he had always done, solving the problem that was actually there. He ate lunch in his truck, a sandwich he made himself, a bottle of water. He watched the neighborhood for a few minutes, the houses, the driveways, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of people who lived here going about their business, a woman walking a dog, 2 kids on bikes. Nobody knew their drainage problem was getting fixed today. Nobody needed to. Walter finished his sandwich, folded the wrapper, and went back to work. The weeks that followed moved in quiet sequence. Brett's NOTA project didn't fall so much as it simply stopped. The remaining investors, once the public divorce filing made the $51,000 transfer record accessible and the full picture of Brett's capital claims became visible, did what careful people do when they see the actual numbers behind the story. They left. Not dramatically. Just gone. A 4th contractor filed suit against Brett's firm. Then a 5th. His credit lines were frozen by the 3rd week. The Porsche, leased, as it turned out, as Kenny had long suspected, was returned to the dealership. The suits and the social presence and the curated image of a man who always had somewhere important to be began to thin out at the edges, the way things do when there is no longer anything underneath holding the shape. Angela called Rochelle, not Walter. Rochelle relayed the conversation to Walter without editorializing, because she didn't need to. The message was clear enough in the plain facts of it. Angela would like to discuss revised terms. Her attorney was prepared to move forward on a more realistic framework. Her tone, per Rochelle, was not impatient anymore. Walter listened. He told Rochelle to proceed. The settlement came together without theater. The $51,000 was folded into the amended claim and calculated against Angela's share. Walter's private investment account, 9 years of consulting income, carefully documented as separate and predating the affair timeline, was excluded from marital assets entirely. The house equity was appraised at fair market value, not inflated, not manipulated, just real. Angela received what the law required, calculated precisely, enough to move forward with, not enough to land where she planned. Walter did not feel satisfied by the number. He felt accurate, which was the thing he had been after from the beginning. Brett and Angela were not visibly together after that. There was no announcement, no explanation. Some things just stop. The boxes from Odessa's house in New Iberia arrived on a Friday afternoon. 2 of them, taped well, shipped carefully, the way a responsible estate handler does a job. Walter had been slow to open them. He wasn't sure why. Not avoidance, exactly. More like not being ready to be finished with her yet. He opened the first box that evening at the kitchen table. Kenny was there, had driven up that morning for no stated reason, which was reason enough. Walter went through the first box slowly. Odessa's good dishes wrapped in paper, 2 of Harold's books on agricultural land rights, a small framed print she'd kept on her bedroom wall for as long as Walter could remember. The second box held her clothes, folded neatly. Beneath them, wrapped in a dish towel, her reading glasses. And beneath that, at the very bottom of the box, flat against the cardboard, an unsealed envelope, his name on the front, in Odessa's handwriting. The careful, upright letters of a woman who had spent 31 years writing clearly for people who needed to be able to read what she wrote. Walter picked it up, turned it over. The flap was loose, not sealed, just tucked. He opened it. 4 pages. Her schoolteacher's script, unhurried and precise, covering both sides of 2 sheets of paper. He read the first line. "Walter, if you're reading this, Then Harold's work has finally come full circle to you, and I've gone on to tell him about it myself." He read slowly. She wrote about Harold, the railroad supervisor who bought his first parcel of land in 1973 with 11 years of saved wages and never told a single person outside their marriage. She wrote about the mineral rights, the patience it took, the decades of watching rather than moving. She wrote that Harold believed wealth that arrived before character was built would ruin both the character and the wealth, and that she had believed it too, and that watching Walter become the man he became, without knowing any of it was coming, was the confirmation she needed that Harold was right. And near the end, in the same unhurried hand, "The money is not the inheritance, baby. You are the inheritance. The money is just what's left over, after Harold and I spent a lifetime proving that ordinary people, living with integrity, can build extraordinary things. Don't let anyone make you forget that you already knew how." Walter read to the end. Then he read it again. He folded the letter along its original creases, carefully. The way you fold something you intend to keep. He slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Kenny, who had not moved or spoken since Walter picked up the envelope, watched his brother's face from across the table. "She knew you, Walt," he said. Walter looked up. His eyes were dry. His expression was the specific kind of quiet that exists on the other side of something that has been a long time coming. "She did," he said. They sat with that. Neither one of them moved for a long while. 14 months later, Walter Reed stood on 12 acres of red Carolina clay and looked at the frame of his house. The plans were spread across the hood of his truck, held flat at the corners by a coffee thermos and a rock he'd picked up off the ground. The framing was done. Pine studs, straight and true, ridge beam set clean. The whole skeleton of the thing standing open against a pale November sky. He could see through it from where he stood, could see the rooms that weren't rooms yet, could see the shape of what it was going to be. 3 weeks until the roof went on. He studied the plans, made a small note in the margin, and looked back up at the frame. Behind him, Kenny was having a disagreement with a subcontractor named Dale about load schedules for the roof trusses. It was not a hostile disagreement. It was the kind of argument two people have when they both know what they're talking about and are enjoying the fact that the other one knows it too. Kenny's voice carried across the site. "I'm not saying you're wrong, Dale. I'm saying you're slower than you need to be, and those are different things." And Dale laughed, and Kenny laughed, and the argument continued at the same volume it had started. Walter did not involve himself. He made another note on the plans and let them work it out. The Odessa Charles Foundation had been incorporated in Charlotte 11 months ago, with a secondary office in New Iberia that operated out of a small building on the same street where Odessa had taught school for the last 14 years of her career. The foundation's focus was specific: water systems that actually functioned, storm drainage that didn't flood schools, broadband infrastructure in rural southern parishes where kids were trying to do homework on connections that didn't work. The kind of work nobody photographed for a campaign. The kind of work that just needed doing. Walter chaired the board. He attended every site review, not ceremonially, not to be seen, but because he understood the work, and the work needed someone who understood it. His project managers had stopped being surprised by his field knowledge about 6 months in. Now they just sent him the elevation data and waited to see what he caught. He had caught a lot. Rochelle came to the site on a Saturday morning in early November with 2 cups of coffee and no agenda she stated out loud. She picked her way across the clay in boots that were not work boots, but were not impractical either. She had dressed for the site the way she dressed for everything, thoughtfully, which Walter noticed and didn't mention. He handed her one of the coffee cups from the hood of his truck, which made her smile because she had brought coffee and he had coffee, and neither of them pointed that out. They walked the frame together. Walter moved through it the way he moved through any structure he was building. Unhurried, attentive, running a hand along a post here, checking a corner there, not performing inspection, but simply being present with the thing. Rochelle walked beside him and asked the right questions in the right places, which was one of the things about her he'd always valued. She didn't ask to fill silence. She asked because she wanted to know. At the center of what would be the main room, where the light came down clean through the open roof framing, she stopped and looked at him. "How are you doing?" she asked. Actually, it was not the professional version of the question. He understood that. Walter looked up at the frame around them, the clean lines of it, the space that was becoming a shape, the work that was halfway between what it had been and what it was going to be. "I'm building something," he said. Rochelle looked at him for a moment with the steady attention of a woman who had known him for 23 years and understood exactly what he meant. She nodded once and drank her coffee. From the other side of the site, Kenny hollered something at Dale, and Dale hollered something back, and they both laughed again. Angela Reed lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte. She had a job she was good at, a hospital administration director role at a smaller facility than she was used to, one she had not planned on needing but had taken without complaint. She did the work competently. She came in on time. She was known among her staff as fair. Brett Calloway's name was not part of her life. Not visibly, not anywhere that could be found. Some things stop and leave no marker. She had every chance to know what Walter was. She chose, for 14 years, not to look closely enough. And now she lived in the ordinary life she had once used as a reason to leave. And she lived it without cruelty from anyone, without punishment beyond the simple arithmetic of her own choices. The world had simply let her be what she had chosen to be. At the end of the day, when the crew had packed up and Kenny's truck was running by the tree line and the land had gone quiet, Walter stood inside the frame of his house and watched the sun drop behind the hills to the west. The light turned the pine framing gold. The land stretched out in every direction. His land, 12 acres of it, ground he had bought with intention and was building on with his own hands. Odessa's letter was in his jacket pocket, where it lived now. The plans were rolled under his arm. There was nowhere he needed to be, nothing he needed to prove. He stood there a while longer, in the frame of the house, in the last of the light. There is a kind of man who holds things up without anyone knowing it, who carries the weight without performing the carrying, who builds the thing and steps back and lets it stand. Angela looked at a foundation and called it a floor. Walter always knew the difference. And now, so did the world. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.